I'm female, and this happened in around 2004, when I was about 14. I live in England. So at the time I was in the goth phase of my life, I used to hang out on a weekend at a place in the city center where all the goth emo alt kids used to hang. I had to get a bus from my home to and from the city center. It was a Saturday, and I can't remember if it was almost winter or if I just stayed out a little later than usual that day, but it was dark when I was on the bus going home. As I sat on the bus, I realized I needed to grab something from the local corner shop before I went home, so I decided to get off the bus at the stop before I'd usually get off at, as it was closer to the shop. The shop was only about a 7-minute walk from my house. Just to explain a bit about the area, the place where my house was a nice, quiet, middle-class housing estate. But walk just a few minutes down the road, and you'd be in a rougher area. The shop was in the rougher area. So I got off the bus and crossed the road to walk to the shop. I always felt a bit self-conscious when I was in this rougher area, and I was dressed up in all my goth clothes and makeup, etc., because the rougher area was kind of where all the chavs lived. Chav is like a British slang term for generally lower-class people who act a certain way. Being goth was like being a walking target for chavs to make fun of. As I walked towards the shop, I got this feeling of dread, and became aware of a guy who stood against the wall outside the shop. He was staring at me. I felt uneasy, but just put it down to the guy being a chav, and thought he might shout an insult at me or whatever, but he didn't. I went in the shop, bought what I needed, and left. I started walking up the road towards where I lived, and became aware of someone walking behind me. I looked, and it was the guy that was stood outside the shop staring at me. I decided to cross onto the other side of the road where there were no houses, only a school, so I can try and figure out if the guy was following me, or if he was just genuinely going in the same direction as me. The guy crossed the road too. I walked a bit further, then decided to cross back onto the side of the road I was originally on, and, surprise, surprise, the guy crossed the road again behind me. By this point I was certain he was following me, so I picked up my pace a little and crossed back over as I needed to be on the other side of the road to get to my housing estate. The guy still followed and crossed behind me again. As we were on the verge of my housing estate, I honestly don't know why I did it, but I decided to turn around and confront him. I asked him if he was following me. He denied it. I said I'd noticed him outside the shop, and mentioned how he had crossed behind me every time I crossed the road. He was still denying following me. He was intoxicated with either drink or drugs or both. Now I'd seen him up close. He was clearly a lot older than me, probably in his 30s. He then started trying to ask me to go to his friend's party with him. I asked him where the party was, and it was back in the rougher area, even further than the shop I'd walked from. I told him no, and told him my age, so he was aware I was a child. And after I told him I was 14, he was still asking me to come to this party with him. I reaffirmed to him that I would not be going to this party, and I was just trying to get home. I wasn't being confrontational, as I was scared of angering him. If anything, I was being quite nice and polite, considering he was an absolute creep. I then said something to him like, "I just want to get home without you following me." And he told me to walk, and that he wasn't going to follow me. I started walking. I took a few steps, and he'd once again started walking towards me, following me. This is where I ran for my life, and he started to run after me. The problem I now had is that my house was pretty much in a straight line from where we were, so if I went to my house, he would see where I lived. So I ran straight past my house and around the corner out of sight, and went to a neighbor, family friend's house. Their door wasn't visible from the street, so fortunately I lost him. Fortunately, my neighbor answered the door and let me in, and phoned my mom and the police. My mom came to the neighbor's house as soon as the neighbor called me. And the police came out, but I don't know if they ever caught the guy, as I never heard anything back. I don't know what would have happened if he had caught me, or if I had been stupid enough to go with him to the quote-unquote party, but I honestly dread to think. Needless to say, I never got off the bus at that stop again. I was having lunch with a friend at Subway, and as we were walking in, I noticed a car driving and parking very terribly with a bit of a flat tire. I thought nothing of it and ordered my sandwich. A few minutes later, a middle-aged blonde woman walked in. She was wearing green cowboy boots, starry leggings, a purple skirt, a red wife beater, sunglasses, and a gray puff jacket. She asked the Subway employee if they still have salad, and then asked, "Does salad help with, cold?" I think she asked because it was cold outside, but a very strange question with very strange phrasing. After waiting in line for 10 minutes for her salad, she exited without even ordering a salad. 5 minutes later, she came back and got in line again. She started plugging her nose between her middle and pointer fingers. She waited in line for another 10 minutes and read the menu with her finger. After a while, she got out of line again and stood at the trash can directly behind my friend, facing me, staring at me, and plugging her nose. She scoffed at me and went outside. She sat on a chair that was missing a leg right in front of the glass door with her back to me. The Subway employee told her that it was broken, and she said she felt it when she sat down, and she continued to sit there. She came back inside for a third time, and she gestured to a high school-aged boy in line behind her. She gestured for him to take out his AirPods. She whispered in his ear, and the guy said out loud, "That one?" and pointed at me. She whispered again and promptly leaves. The kid told me that she told him that she hates the girl facing the door, me. After we finished eating, my friend and I stepped outside to smoke, and the weather was getting nicer, so we stayed outside for a good half an hour. We soon realized she was the chick who parked all crazy, and she was sitting outside watching us, literally not looking away whatsoever, the whole time with her car door open. I was scared shitless, but my friend was smart enough to get her license plate number in case something happened, while I froze, trying not to make it obvious that I saw what she was doing. Luckily, I made good acquaintances with one of the Subway employees. I spent half of high school skipping school there, and he let me hang out in the storage room for a bit until she left. I later found out that seconds after I stepped into the storage room, she had come back into the store, taken a quick look around, and then dipped. I don't want to know what would have happened if that high school kid didn't speak up, or if she didn't part crazy, because I wouldn't have noticed her watching me. I don't believe I did anything to offend her, although I may not have been able to hide my disdain for her fashion choices. She didn't appear to be under the influence of anything, despite her sunglasses and reckless driving. I honestly hope she was under the influence, because it would be a much more depressing reality if she were just that mentally ill and wasn't being actively treated for it. I wish my friend kept their license plate number on her phone so I could have possibly intervened with the obvious drug or mental issue at play, as some atypical social behavior puts her in danger as well. By far one of my strangest encounters. I'll update you if I come across her again. So, this all starts when me and my two buddies, me 19 and them 20 and 17, went to go fish off this bank on the river in the afternoon. The layout is that you drive over the levee before you drop down into a boat ramp and parking area right next to the river. We brought pizza, beer, weed, music, and of course our rods, hoping we'd just hang out and do some late night fishing. At this point, we're all set up on the bank with our chairs and speaker, having a nice evening, and it's probably been 2 hours, and it's 9 p.m. now. All three of us were feeling good with some beers in our system, and then we all of a sudden hear 2 cars pull up with super loud music, and everyone gets out. The cars must have had 4 to 5 people in each one, because I heard a lot of people talking, but it was all in Spanish, so I couldn't make anything out. We try to ignore it, but then it gets so loud that we couldn't enjoy ourselves. So we start packing our stuff to head back to the car and just chill out while we sober up. While we're gathering our things, we start to hear what sounds like an argument go down. We start to hear lots of glass shattering and people screaming at the top of their lungs. They couldn't see us, but they were basically no more than 20 feet behind our heads. At this point, we're just keeping quiet, And then we started to hear what sounded like someone getting punched repeatedly, and then a loud splash into the river by the boat ramp, and someone saying, "Nah, leave him," which were the only words spoken in English. At this point, we didn't know what we just heard happen, and we didn't want to stick around and find out. The three of us trekked back up the steep incline to get back to the car, but as soon as we came into their view, they all got back into their two cars and quickly sped back over the levee. Except we spotted one of the cars just sitting on top of the levee, slowly creeping forward. When we turned our car on, that car then went fully over the levee. We realized we were the only car left in the parking lot, and it was now pitch black outside, around 9:30 p.m. We sat there for no more than 30 seconds, just trying to process what we just heard go down, and then we decided we need to get out of there completely and park somewhere to sober all the way up. As we're going over the levee, the road goes over it and then down and makes a sharp left. Right after we take that sharp left, our hearts drop when we see 4 cars lined up completely horizontal across the road, blocking us from getting through. There's orchards on our left and right, so there was no going around at all. At this point, my buddy just gassed it straight towards their bumpers to try and split in between the cars and get out of there, even if it meant damaging the front end of his car. Just as we do that, one of the 4 cars moved slightly out of the way, creating a gap. We flew right through it and got the fuck out of there, and they were laying on the horn while we passed through. We don't know what their intentions were, but clearly there was 2 cars in the boat ramp area where we were at, and 2 cars on the other side of the levee blocking the road from anyone else coming in. I ended up filing a police report, just in case they really did dump a body into the river. It happens all the time here, but I haven't heard anything back. Definitely one of my most terrifying experiences. So to the 4 cars who may or may not have robbed us or, God forbid, killed us, let's not meet again. When we were young, my cousins and I had a bush house at the end of the back garden, just before the garden opened up on the heath. Due to me being a full-time wheelchair user from birth, it was Gran's idea that instead of having a tree house that had to be climbed, it would be safer and more practical to have a bush house that all us kids could use. Even though we protested greatly, as although I am disabled, I frequently used to climb trees in the local parks and over the heath with the help of my cousins, obviously. But Gran's word was final, and we never argued with her, as she was a beautiful and lovely matriarch, but also as tough as old boots, and very scary when pushed. So with that, we busied ourselves on choosing an appropriate bush for our new play area. On selecting a perfect one, Gran delegated tasks to the older boys to clear the outer area of the bush, and also make a little hollow inside it with pieces of spare wood on the ground to serve as a basic floor, so that my little wheelchair could run safely and easily inside it. Gran was reasonably young at the time, and while the boys were doing the heavy work, she arranged us younger ones in getting furniture, supplies, and accessories to make our new play space cozy and comfortable for us all. A year later, our bush house was in full use. In the daytime, us younger ones used to play in it after school. On weekends and holidays, and in the evenings and nights, it was a place where the older cousins could have some privacy away from the eyes of Gran and Mom to do whatever they did. Our bush house was cozy though. We got chairs, beanbags, and floor cushions donated by relatives and friends of the family. We also had a small table that we made a tablecloth for, and our Auntie Jay made some pretty curtains that we hung up the best we could. We even had a cupboard where we kept snacks in, and only when the older boys or Mum were there, we were allowed to use the camping stove to heat tinned beans and sausages or pot noodles up and make tea. Gran's bingo friend Jean donated a hand-me-down rug. It was shabby and out of date, but we thought it was beautiful. It was slap bang in the middle of summer holidays, probably in early July when this happened. Elle and I were 7, and G was 11. Our older cousin G's brother A was there earlier, but by 3 o'clock had grown tired of hanging around with us and had gone out with his mates. The 3 of them were coming back later to make us all dinner on the stove. Elle and I were sitting at the table playing Beggar Your Neighbor with a pack of playing cards that we got from the living room cupboard. and G was sitting in the corner of the bush house on a beanbag reading The Secret Garden for the third time. It was just another normal at-home day. Nothing unusual or odd occurred until around 4 o'clock when we all heard a sound that was at odds with the peaceful scene. It was between a growl, an owl's hoot, and a man mumbling. We weren't particularly outdoorsy kids, being born and raised in the outskirts of urban London. But being bright little girls, we all knew that owls are nocturnal creatures, and that the accompanying sounds were mixed with the hoots that didn't come from the same bird. The weird sounds were joined by a furtive and stealthy rustling coming from the back of the bush house. Actually, it was really near to where G was sitting, and she jumped up, stifling a scream by covering her mouth with her hands. We also saw a dark, dog-like sized shape through the dense foliage of the back of the bush house, which incidentally led straight onto the beginning of the heath, as I said earlier. The strangest thing about this figure was that it was very present, but rather ethereal, almost as if the figure was attempting to hide intentionally. Also, throughout this period, there were no other natural sounds, no bird song, no insect sounds, no background human noise. Being right in the center of a council estate, you could always hear people talking, cars revving, and dogs barking. All the regular noises of urban community living. But at that time, it was as if the entire world had paused, and us three were the only ones conscious and present, along with the mysterious figure. We didn't know what to do, but we gathered together, and both G and L took one handle of my wheelchair and pulled me back out of our bush house, not taking our eyes off the translucent figure as we went. When we were free from the bush house and close enough to home for us to feel out of danger and safe, we just looked at each other very doubtfully. We were crapping ourselves. G said suddenly, "Stay here, don't move or speak." She ran to the garden shed and climbed up the side to the manky rotting roof. I completely lost it, letting out a squeal of utter fear. Quick-witted as usual, Elle put her hand over my mouth and hushed me. Elle and I watched while G looked over the hedgerow which divided our back garden from the beginning of the heath. From our position, her face was clearly visible. G's expression was a mixture of confusion, surprise, and fright, and her pretty brown eyes looked troubled. We waited for G to come back to us before asking her in earnest what she saw. She didn't answer straight away, but when she did, she said, "It was so strange. I didn't see anything. No dogs, no other animals." She paused, her young mind trying to summon the words to explain what she witnessed. There was a man. I saw the back of him walking away towards the iron fence. My 7-year-old's mind found it hard to comprehend what G was saying, and one look at Elle told me she was experiencing the same. We both said together, "What man, G? What did he look like?" G sighed, biting her lip, a habit she still has to this day when she is anxious, worried, or trying to explain something tricky or difficult. I didn't see him properly, his face and all that. I only saw his back. He did have really long scruffy hair, though. Her eyes wandered over nervously to the end of the garden, leading out to the very public heath. Elle and I both followed G's gaze. We all shuddered. Nobody spoke for ages. For a long time we sat in silence, G and Elle sitting on the back step and me in my wheelchair alongside them. Suddenly, I noticed something and exclaimed to the others, "Everything is back to normal. Listen." We all listened. The regular everyday noises had returned. The world appeared to have resumed business as usual. A little while later, A and his two mates came back, and sensing some tension from us, they asked us what was up. We did tell them everything, and two of them ran out to the back to have a look around. They were gone for about 45 minutes. When they returned, they said they didn't see anything. No strange man, no animals, nothing unusual or dodgy at all. We spent the rest of the day hanging out with the boys, eating dinner in the bush house, and later watching films and eating junk food. We didn't tell Mom about the experience until a few years back, long after we were grown, and we still don't know or can't explain what happened that day.